Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about autism?
So, autism is a developmental disorder that has only been described since the 1930s and has changed radically in its description since that time. It has gone up and down and back and forth. It is a disorder that impacts people very differently. There are many different levels of autism and many different kinds of symptoms of autism. So there's a saying that says, if you know a person with autism, you know a person with autism. It's very accurate. Um, the core deficits, so called, have to do with difficulties with speech and language, social communication, and that's really it. Some people with autism have sensory issues that make it very tough to be in bright lights or to hear loud noise. Other people don't. Some people with autism can't speak at all. Others are incredibly articulate. Some people with autism are violent or aggressive. Most are not. The vast majority are not. Some people with autism are very routinized. Others, not so much. So it's an extremely broad range of people. You can kind of make some generalizations about what issues are most likely to come up. Certainly, people with autism have a hard time with things like imitating other people, using speech in a typical manner, no matter how verbal they might be, being able to read body language, being able to guess what another person is thinking. Some people with autism have a hard time with uh, being able to do sports or other things to do with motor coordination. Some have what are called splinter skills. So if you ever saw the movie Rain Man and you saw how brilliant he was at some tiny little piece of figuring things out, that he could tell you everything about Qantas Airlines that there was to know, or he could figure out, what day of the week it was going to be on the 14th of June in the year 3017. Those are what are called splinter skills or savant skills. And some people with autism have what is called savant syndrome, which is extraordinary abilities in one very specific area. So you'll find people with autism who are math savants or music savants or incredibly, that type of thing. Usually that doesn't translate to being able to put it to work in a typical way, but there certainly are people with autism with amazing abilities. So I hope that was helpful. It's pretty broad ranging.
So, you have a son with autism,
Correct.
and how did you first notice that he might have autism?
So let me just preface by saying that when Tom was little, autism spectrum disorder was actually diagnosed quite differently. There were 5 different disorders, and one of them was called pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. That was his diagnosis, not autism. Um, we noticed it only because he was in preschool, and the preschool teacher said, something's off. Instead of playing with the other kids as he used to do, he stands in front of the mirror and moves his hands up and down and just observes himself and doesn't seem to want to engage with the other kids. And we thought that was very odd. And first we thought, well, maybe it's the preschool. So we tried changing preschools, and it was actually worse. So we took him to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, would you rather have a red lollipop or a purple lollipop? And he said, purple. He said, here you go. And he said, he's fine. And that was the end of that. And it wasn't until he was at that point, he was probably almost 3. When he was about 3.5, the preschool that he was at, the second preschool, finally said, you really should take him for an evaluation. And we took him for an evaluation, and we were told, yes, well, the diagnosis is pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. And I said, oh. And he said, yeah, you probably should be in a small classroom setting, and, you might want to consider speech therapy. And I said, okay, we can do that. And I had no clue, not a single clue that that had anything to do with autism. And it took me the better part of a year to discover that PDD-NOS and autism were in fact essentially part of the same spectrum of disorder.
Interesting.
It was weird.
Did they suggest therapy or treatment for him?
Yes and no. At that time, the psychologist who saw him, and it has always been the case that the gold standard of treatment for autism is something called applied behavioral analysis, ABA. It is a behavioral therapy that is intended to teach people to behave appropriately. And at that time, it was provided 40 hours a week, one-on-one, in this very intense way that had nothing to do with engaging in the world at all. And he said, in my opinion, that is tantamount to child abuse. And I said, sounds right to me. And I was introduced to a woman who was involved through her son in a therapy called Floor Time. And Floor Time, which is still around, was developed by this brilliant psychologist, child psychologist named Stanley Greenspan. And essentially, Floor Time is a therapy where you get down on the floor with your child, and the point of it is to get your child with autism to engage with you, to have some kind of back and forth communication, and to build on what they are doing in such a way that they engage with you, and to do more and more and more of that, and to build skills through emotional bonding and play. And I thought, that's for me. It's not for everybody. It requires, there's no rules to it really. So you are constantly having to figure out what to do next and how to do it and how to get that kid to engage with you. And I actually went to some of Greenspan's conferences where he presented, and you watch him with these little wild kids just running around the room like crazy as if they were little monsters. And within 5 minutes, even though they couldn't speak, they were engaging with him like children because of just his way of, oh, you're running, I'm going to run with you. Or, oh, you're running and I'm going to stand in front of you. And they would move his hand. You moved my hand. What should I do? You know, that kind of thing. And it didn't matter how old they were. He was able to get them to engage with him. The problem was it was very, very tough for most of the parents to do that with him. And he'd say, now you try it. And they would sit there and they'd go, come on, Johnny, come sit with me. And Johnny would just ignore because they weren't engaging with Johnny. And what I learned as a result of going to these conferences and working with Floor Time and talking about it is that most parents have forgotten how to pretend. They've forgotten how to get down on the floor and make things real that aren't real. You know, Tom loved Thomas the Tank Engine, which is perfectly typical for an autistic kid. They love Thomas. I'm not sure why. It's amazing, amazing toys that you can play with and build with and create with, and we did. And the back and forth was wonderful, but the trains are real. They're alive. And you have to be able to know that. And you have to be able to not have it be that the train has to go a certain direction or connect in a certain way. You have to work with the child. So we did that a lot. However, Floor Time is not provided in schools. Floor Time is, therapists, if you want to hire one, are not paid for by insurance. ABA is what is provided. Right. So first of all, he loved to draw even when he was 2 years old. So we put pieces of paper all over the walls and just gave him crayons, and he could just scribble. And then he seemed to like music, and we got a little electric keyboard, and he liked to noodle around on it. And then we took him to some classes, like toddler classes, and they basically threw him out because he didn't behave the way he was supposed to. So then but as he got a little bit older, first of all, my husband and I are both museum people. We both worked at museums, and because of that and because of our location, we went to the museums all the time. It never occurred to us not to. So we would take Tom. Some museums were very easy for him, Children's Museum being one. But going to places like the Art Museum were tough. But because we were museum people, it didn't really occur to us not to keep doing it, or that you couldn't do that with an autistic child. So we just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And he got yelled at by the guards a couple of times for climbing on benches. And then one day, he was at the museum with his father at the art museum, and he looked around. He was 7 years old, and he looked around and he said, "It's Van Gogh's sunflowers!" And all the people at the museum turned around and went, "Wow, that little boy is so advanced." And it was like the most exciting moment, you know. He loves fine art. He loves fine art museums. At this point, he started learning his way around the Philadelphia Art Museum so that he knew every gallery, every picture, every item. It was cray-cray. And that was very exciting for us. But putting him into an art class was almost impossible because he doesn't, and still doesn't, really have, but he certainly didn't then, the ability to listen to spoken language, translate it into meaning, and act on it instantaneously. It takes him time to get from point A to point B. He doesn't look around the room and say, "Everybody is sitting down, I should be sitting down." He doesn't see it. It doesn't click in his head. That means somebody has to say to him, "Tom, let me show you. Tom, let me take you here. Tom, let me show you which..." He doesn't think the way that other people think. He doesn't imitate the way other people imitate. And so inclusion becomes incredibly difficult. So when he was 7, he said, "I want to learn how to play the horn," which we didn't know what that meant exactly. And a friend gave us a clarinet. So I thought, all right, let me take him to learn to play the clarinet. And that'll be very exciting for him. And it turned out to be incredibly difficult because, again, he doesn't learn like other kids. And he's autistic and he has this diagnosis. And so we were told, well, you could do music therapy. All right, we'll do music therapy. Well, then I'll teach you how to play the clarinet in music therapy. It's like, well, when's he going to learn music? Well, what do you mean? That didn't make any sense to them. So I started looking for a music teacher. There are wonderful music schools in Philadelphia, and they all told us we don't teach his kind. However, a special disabilities program at Temple University if you want to take him there. And I was like, no, I just want him to learn to play the clarinet. He doesn't need a special disabilities program. He just needs a teacher. And I went to probably 4 different music schools, all of which turned me down, until finally this 21-year-old girl who had just finished college said, "Sure, I'll try teaching him." And she was brilliant. And she had a million ideas, and she taught him keyboard as well as clarinet. And she advised us to get something called a plateau clarinet, which it's got covers like a flute. It's really intended for people like with arthritis and stuff, but it made it much easier to play it, and he still has it. It's a very fine instrument, and he started to learn to play. So at that point, we started taking him to the young people's concerts in Philadelphia at the Verizon Hall, which again was one of those processes where if you're not dedicated, you just say forget it. Because you go in and he gets overwhelmed and he makes noise, or he gets up and you got to leave. Because you can't make a mess, you can't make a noise, you have to be just like everybody else. So you just keep doing it over and over and over until it becomes a normal thing to do. And that's what we did. And he began to love it, and to love classical music, and to play in recitals.
Then piano, not together. Clarinet and then piano. Thomas Cook. Piano first.
But all of these things, you just had to keep doing it over and over. You couldn't, and nobody was going to support it because it wasn't part of what is normally supported for a child with autism. They're just trying to teach him how to say please and thank you, share, ask questions, and get his hair cut without screaming. You know, that's the focus. The arts are not there. So
It sounds like you had a lot of patience and determination.
I can't even tell you why we were so dedicated. I can't, I mean, there wasn't like any conversation that said we must keep doing this no matter what. It just was like, this is what we did. This is how we were brought up, going to young people's concerts and going to the museums. Not quite as much because we didn't, have that connection, but it just didn't occur to us not to, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so you would have done it no matter what his abilities.
Just never occurred to us not to. Isn't that weird? But he liked music, so we took him to concerts. It was sort of that kind of thing, and we just never really thought about not doing it. It just seemed like critical. And the more that we did it, the more it became clear to me that what made these activities so important is the fact that they are lifelong skills and lifelong interests, because so much of what a kid with autism learns in their young years is how to be a typical kindergartner, which is completely different from how to be a typical first grader, which is completely different, et cetera, down the line. So they're constantly learning skills that they then dump. And then, like any other kid, if you get them into, finally got them into Boy Scouts or something, and then the Boy Scouts dump you at age 18 and say, well, good luck with that, and you're done. And we hadn't realized to what degree this was going to be the case, that we hadn't thought about how often you learn things only to dump them when you're a kid. And for a kid with autism, it takes so much to learn anything that to not teach something that they're going to use for the rest of their lives seems really silly. So swimming was important because you're going to use that for the rest of your life. But kickball, why? And so we kind of went that route of looking for things that he could use and love forever, and not just until he was 12, when all the rules change.
Do you think art and music have any particular therapeutic value?
They can, absolutely. There's lots and lots of, I just wrote about that. There's tons of research that says yes. It depends on how it's used and how the person engages with it. So, obviously there's arts therapy that's, been used for many, many decades and is very successful in building social skills, communication skills, movement skills, fine motor skills, all of that, absolutely. Just engaging with it as a human being, of course. For Tom, has built huge social communication skills, behavioral skills, fine motor skills, reading skills, all that, because that's what it takes to be an artist or a musician. You have to be able to do all of those things. What happened was when he got into grade 4 and we said, okay, we would like him to be in band. But of course, he's a kid with special needs, and they had a one-on-one aide, and they said, well, our one-on-one aide doesn't know how to read music, so sorry, we can't do that. And I said, when does band meet? And they said, 7 o'clock in the morning, before school. I said, fine, I'll be there. So I became his shadow, his one-on-one aide in band, because there was nobody else who would do it. And they had never had an autistic child in band. There are many people with autism who are extraordinary singers and excellent musicians, but most of them aren't, in part because they're not allowed in band, because there's no one-on-one person who's going to support them. So I learned how to play the clarinet when he played clarinet, and then I sat there in band and I pointed to where he was supposed to be because that was the hardest thing for him, was just staying on the page. And of course the fear of the band teacher that he might do something strange and surprising. So I had to make sure that no strange, surprising things happened. And then, of course, I had to sit behind him during the actual concerts when they suddenly decided to put the timpani right behind the clarinets. And you think, my goodness, that doesn't sound like a good idea. But it worked. So, he was okay with it. But many kids with autism would have freaked out completely because of the sensory issues, but he didn't. But he had to be taught how to sit quietly and wait, and how to this and how to that. And it took a lot.
I've been to band camp, and I met a couple of counselors who were so kind and so friendly, and they helped me out with my music, especially Olivia, because she told me that Kate was gonna be away for and doing other things, and she was gonna help me with more of this music thing.
Tom is a very good clarinet player, but he also has very good ears. And so he was playing the part that the flute plays because he heard the flute next to him, right?
Yes.
So you want to tell about Mr. Shar and about...
Mr. Shar is a good friend of ours. He's our neighbor now, because I like the way that he brought his remote control plane, and Paul Weller brought his toy remote control helicopter, seeing which one flies first and the other one flies last.
You want to tell about any of the music you played?
Like Around the World, Green Onions, Lowrider, and many others.
What I wanted to ask you about was things that you're doing now with your world downstairs, your Lego sculptures, painting, playing the organ, like talking about what you like to do with music and art now.
Well, okay, here it goes. You see, down at the bottom of the basement, I have decided to let my Lego world be enormous. To have more roads, more hills, more mountains, and stuff that I never had them before. And because I want all these, it was from a video I had learned that I had watched, was called I Love Toy Trains. And I wanted to be like the man with the glasses who was the friend of Walt Disney himself. And Walt Disney told the man with the glasses of how he loved and trained so much. And there's something else. Once my Lego village is finally completed with the city, with buildings and highways, and once everything is completed, airplanes, dragons, spaceships, and a lot of things that are soaring will be flying around. Like I found in the Disney movie Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and Treasure Planet. This is my salvage company dock with Theodore Tugboat and his pals. Right here. These are the ships and boats. They're in the submarines. This is the Ulysses submarine from Walt Disney's the Atlantis, the Lost Empire.
Wow.
And that's the Aqua Evac, the Sub Pod, and many other boats. And pretending like they're honking and tooting out in the ocean. This is the farm. This is the town and this is the countryside where all the sheep and cows are grazing in the field, and pretending they're mooing and baaing, and eating grass, because they're hungry. And I made a little log cabin for the farmer and lots of many residence people to come here. And construction machines. And
Do you want to tell a little bit about, because you were telling upstairs about how you started playing the organ. Do you want to tell that story again? How you got started and what you've been doing?
I heard John, a very nice man from that church, when he was playing that organ. I always wanted to play that big instrument, and he gave me lessons. And we became great pals. And the preacher that I met, I bowed my head and said, I shall become part of the church family.
Nice job, Tom. Excellent.
Can you tell a little bit about Town Band also?
Okay. For Town Band, I like the way that my father was the announcer, and he let little children march right behind him. And the most surprising thing of all was my good friend, Paul Terry, and he was there too. And so was his mother.
Tell about how you play, though.
Well, yes, but I was getting to there.
Sorry.
But I played many songs in the Town Band, like Under the Sea from Little Mermaid, that I really love, and songs from the movies like Star Trek, E.T., The Extraterrestrial, and Star Trek, and also Looney Tunes, Liberty Bell, and last but not least, Stars and Stripes Forever. What I like being part of the band is that I remember the great part when we watched the fireworks all the way from Falmouth Heights, and all the boats and ships in the harbor tooted their whistles and tooted their horns. Even the big motorboat gave a blast of horn of its own.
And how about doing your painting and other art projects with Linda?
I had made pictures of mountains, trees, the white caps on the ocean with the seagulls.
What did you like about doing that?
It was quite beautiful, because I love being an artiste,
What do you love about it?
because art is my favorite kind. It's my favorite career,
How come?
because I have always liked being one of the artists. Vincent van Gogh, Claude Monet, Pablo Picasso, and the guy who painted the green violinist, Mark Chagall,
Chagall. And Tom Cook.
and me, Tom Cook, is a grown man. I began teaching the guys at Capabilities about Philadelphia, because they've never been to it before. I showed them the museums where Froggy lives, and the Academy of Music, and many others.
And you taught him about fish?
I also showed them the coelacanths, a prehistoric fish which is also real.
Anything else you taught?
I also told them about voice actors who voiced the cartoon characters like Jody Benson, Tom Kenny, Jeff Bennett, and Jim Cummings, Tara Strong, and also Frank Welker, and Candy Milo. on Zoom, I've been reading books to children because they've never seen any of these books. And I began showing the pictures and telling me what the characters are doing. Because they didn't know much any of this stuff.
You want to tell us some of the books you read?
I read Time of Wonder, Walter the Baker, and The Little Mermaid, and lots of many others. Caps for Sale, Abby Yo-Yo, and Abby Yo-Yo Returns.
How did the kids like it?
They loved it. But this time, once we return back from Florida, I will read to the children this time Caribbean Dream by Rachel Isadora, because the story takes place in the Caribbean, just on the other side of the Bahamas that we've been to. The book I would definitely read is Bert Dow, Deep Water Man, because it tells a story about an old fisherman who had retired, who had 2 boats, swallowed by a whale, protected from the storm, and starts smearing it on the whale's body to make him burp. And all the whales were very happy that they got all the bandages and strapped to their tails. When we've been to Disney World a bunch of times, I met the princesses. I met Ariel, and she was so kind and so friendly that I had been sitting down next to her before COVID came. She gave me a nickname, Angelfish. I was so happy that no one's ever given me a nickname before.
How has COVID affected you? It's probably changed a lot of what you've been able to do this past year.
Oh, I've been wearing my mask, and it was protecting me, and I had 2 shots. It hurt a bit, but I was all right.
There were some things you didn't get to do because of COVID.
I didn't get to go to capabilities. I didn't get to go to life of meeting all the friends that I know. And I didn't go back to work. But luckily, they sent me, and Christy and Shelley had been sending me surprises like toys and whoopie pies. Plus, I offered a parade for my 24th birthday at the old house. And I told them I wish I could invite you all in to try the cake that my sister Sarah made, but I can't because of COVID. But I told them it was a great pleasure to meet you all.
So what are you looking forward to doing now that COVID is receding a little?
Well, if you want to know, I'll tell you. When my birthday begins on July 25th, when I turn 25 years old, I'm just not really sure what I want to do as something special, because some of the buildings in Woods Hole are completely closed, and because I had my birthday at the Landfall,
Oh, yeah, you did. That's right.
because it was one of my favorite restaurants. Now I'm not really sure what I would really
Landfall
do.
will be open.
We can go to restaurants by then.
It'll be okay to go to Landfall. That's what you want to do.
Sure, but for my 25th birthday, there are a couple of presents that are childish, and some grown up.
What Marilyn is asking is, how will things change now that we don't have to worry so much about COVID?
There's one thing. The people in our family are coming over on June the 23rd because they've been vaccinated, and I will be able to hug him now. I know she
What kinds
she
of things are you
doesn't.
looking forward to doing in the community, like going to museums again, or
Playing in town
Well,
band a little bit, they might do that too.
well, the museums I thought like going back to were the Museum of Science in Boston. One of my personal favorites. I like going there. I just like the exhibits, the animals.
Wow. How about the Museum of Art? Should we go back there?
I think we can. Because when we've been there, it was the greatest place I ever have been to because it has great things about Egypt and how I posed to being a statue. But we stayed until closing time.
What was your favorite in the museum?
The musical instrument museum exhibit had the musical instruments and one of my and another personal favorite, a one big sculpture of a hand. And if you looked closely, it was entirely made out of red roses. But but all I remember is that Sarah and I, with our father, we used to spend the night at the museum, but it felt a little bit uncomfortable because I felt a little bit afraid and a bit scared because I felt like we're being watched by dinosaurs and animals coming to life and attacking us, and it felt a little bit strange of sleeping in the middle of a museum in the middle of the city.
how about Falmouth? Do you have any favorite museums here, or how about the beach, or things that
Well,
you want to do?
Well, there is one beach I want to do again. Probably Magansett, and probably Unchappie. But luckily, what I like going there is that we might want to wear our tails again and be as grown-up mer people.
And also we get to see all the creatures at Chappie.
Yep. And go to the boardwalk, again, and
And Sandwich?
in Sandwich, but Sarah has changed from catching crabs to not catch them anymore. And wants to set them free. But luckily, when we were catching them, the people were walking by on the boardwalk and asked us some nice questions like, "What are you gonna do with those crabs? Are you gonna eat them?" We said, "Oh no, we're just catching them and let them go." And they were curious.
We can go back to P-Town.
Yep, Provincetown, one of our personal favorites.
I want to ask you about more about Falmouth and whether you go to any of the craft shows or music shows that we do here, like Arts Alive.
They were big. They were beautiful. And I got a beautiful tattoo on me, which was the Chinese symbols, yin and yang, but then it faded away. Yep. But luckily, we saw beautiful chalk on the sidewalk, like goddess and this drawing of the world.
That sounds great. So we're going to do Arts Alive again this year, but not in June. We're going to do it in September, and I hope you will be able to come.
Well, certainly, but that will be when I'm 25 years old.
Yeah.
But I'm not that old. I'm still young.
Okay. Yeah, so the thing that is, I think, most helpful for both a family of a person with special needs and the person with special needs, whether they're autistic or they have Downs or any other issues, is knowing what you're getting into before you get into it. so you can plan and think about it and look at it ahead of time. If there were such a thing as a video or photographs or some other means for people to look and see. So when we go, here is what we're going to see, and here is where we're going to go, and which of these things would you be interested in doing, rather than simply arriving in a location with a lot of people, a lot of noise, and no idea of what's going on, which can be very overwhelming. And if something doesn't work, or you just sort of wander around and it's too loud, it's too quiet, it's too boring, you're not getting it, you can easily just lose it completely. So any kind of preview in whatever form, whether it be, as I say, online, whether it be photographs, whether it be video, a combination, is very, very helpful. Having clear instructions when you get there, if there are things that are specifically designed or intended for people with special needs, whether you use signage, visual signage, just people there needs to be a clarity about, we're going to make a this, here are the tools we're going to use to make a this, here's the process we're going to use. And rather than saying, hey, come on over, let's, it has to be more structured than just, hey, come on kids, let's play. Or else it's going to be just, they're going to walk away. They're not going to know, they're not going to see clearly what your intentions are, what the process is, what the outcome could be. Direct instruction really makes a lot of difference. So what we're going to do first is we're going to sit down at this table. Don't assume that they already know that that's the first step. And the second thing we're going to do is, and so just clarity, I think, really makes a big difference. And then, of course, communicating with the public that this is what will be available. Here are the options. If you want something specially designed for people with special needs, we have something, but no need to do that. You don't have to. But here's what's going to be there when you get there. Here are all the pieces, all the things you can try.
Some of the things for little kids would also be appropriate for Tom.
Could be. Well, as you can see, he would prefer to instruct little kids, even if the activity is one that he's developmentally at, sort of, he could do art and he would enjoy it, but he would enjoy it more if you were teaching art and engaging in it that way, I think. Autism being as broad-ranging as it is, there are many people with autism who would be mortally insulted by something like that. There would be people with autism who would not be ready for something like that. So there is no answer to the question of, would this work for people with autism? As I say, in Tom's case, he would love to teach art, and he is ready to teach art.
He's doing it.
Yeah. That doesn't mean he couldn't do something a little bit more sophisticated, but he would not feel uncomfortable with that. But I know that there are many people, particularly adults with developmental differences, who would be uncomfortable with it. For example, at Riverview, where he was very happy to be singing songs, as he mentioned, from shows he loved as a little kid, like Sesame Street. Some of the kids, young adults, just thought that was babyish and didn't want to have anything to do with it. And that's just a personal choice. And then you're going to have people with autism who you can barely engage at all, who have almost no words. And will they stop and sit and do a project? They might, but they would really need to be prepped for it and know what was coming, and their parents would have to be engaged and provide support. If you wanted to reach out through, the special needs groups at schools and let people know this is an option, and if you're interested in having a child participate, you can watch this video or you can come to this workshop ahead of time so you know what to expect and how to help them engage. That would be neat.
Great ideas.
Well, it's all about prep. It really is, and also about having a plan B, which is, to say, okay, That didn't work. What is the other option? Because if everybody has to do it a certain way, or the expectation is that you're going to behave in this way and you don't, does that mean, well, you failed? If that doesn't work, if you say, well, everybody's going to dance the hokey pokey, and some group of people just don't, either they don't understand what you're doing or they think it's babyish, then what's the other option? Having enough people to be supportive so that if something does go wrong, they can say, hey, why don't you come over here where it's quiet, and not have to leave the entire group. That's also very important. So, if you have parents who are involved, that's much, much easier, because then they're there with their child or adult child. They can take charge of that. If you have a group of people with special needs you don't have a lot of support, then you need volunteers who are comfortable with the idea that they might have to say, hey, you know what, this isn't working for you, let's go do blah. Yeah, I think it really comes down to accepting the fact that this person is maybe speaking idiosyncratically. It isn't going to in any way injure you. There's a lot of fear that seems to relate to idiosyncrasies, even the simplest ones. So I've noticed that if Tom says, it's a pleasure to meet you, it puts people off.
Yeah.
They don't expect anybody to say it's a pleasure to meet you, because they say, great to meet you, not it's a pleasure to meet you. He learned it's a pleasure to meet you probably through TV. He uses it appropriately. There's absolutely nothing wrong with saying it, but it puts people off. I can't stop the fact that people are put off by a tiny difference in choice of words that's intended only to be positive and pleasant. It just how people are. And with Town Band, with all of these things, the reason that it took so much work is that in order to truly not just be allowed to be there, but to truly be included in something like Town Band, it took us 3 tries. Because it required not just being able to play the music. It required understanding the way that people talk to each other. When do you speak? When do you not speak? What is you're wearing certain clothing. It has to be, you have to sit in a certain way. You have to listen to the director and look at him in a certain way. What if he changes the music at the last minute, which happens? What if some of the people that you're used to having sit near you aren't there anymore? So it took a lot of experimentation and direct education to teach Tom how to be in the room in the right way, with the right people, with the right instrument, prepared and ready at the right moment, because he was accustomed to playing and then putting the instrument down. You can't do that. Even if there's a 16 measure phrase, you can't put your instrument down. You have to have it held up. He had to learn to do that. And even now, with all of that, he still has to, we had to go to the librarian and say, we need all the music, 100% of it, and we need to copy it and have our own copies, so that he can spend the winter learning this music with his own instructor, so that he is ready to be engaged with the rest of the band when they start the rehearsals. And even when he does that, he still has to have somebody sitting next to him, because if he gets lost in the music, which will happen, he's no good at catching up again. He needs somebody sitting next to him who was also a third clarinetist to say, we're here. The clarinet instructor he works with, Bert McKelvey, who is a brilliant teacher, also did things with the music, like cut it apart so that we had copy it, so that we have, instead of having a repeat sign and go back to the top, he literally has it laid out with the next part and the next part and the next part. Tom understands what a repeat is, but he sometimes forgets. Just all these things had to be in place so that the rest of the band could be comfortable having him in that place, involved appropriately, playing the music properly with the support he needed, and they could look and see, yes, there is somebody who is in charge of him, which also I think made a huge difference for people's comfort level, that somebody is sitting there next to him who is also playing the clarinet. And in order to do that, you need to have the money to pay the person who is sitting next to him. And you need the money to pay the instructor. And you need to also have the time to do all of this. And you need to think ahead. And you need to make the connection with the librarian so that she's willing to do that even though she won't do it for anybody else. It's huge. It's a huge undertaking to get to the place where a person with autism is ready to be engaged in something that complex. But what happened, which was very super cool, is that Tom was in the process of going through a rehearsal, and Peter came to pick him up, and Peter and I did, and Levada, who knew us, came out and said, you guys are into theater. We need somebody to be the MC because Glenn is leaving. Would either of you be interested? And Peter said, I'll do it, which has been wonderful for Peter, and it's also, obviously very nice for Tom as well. So that's cool. But it wasn't the other way around. It wasn't that Peter got him involved because he was the MC. It was Tom got him involved because he was playing clarinet. And Tom Borning knows Tom because he played in the jazz band at Morse Pond. Levada knew him because he played in jazz band in Lawrence School, so that really helped because Lynn had never met him. So they knew that he could do it. When he did the band camp, George Shar happens to be a wonderful, wonderful teacher. Not everybody would have said, we'll figure it out, and they did. And that was just beyond anything that had ever happened for Tom, that without a support person, without prep, with nothing, that Summer Sound said, sure. And they found kids who wanted to sit next to him and mentor him. And it was wonderful. But it was, all of these things, they're not small undertakings. When he was small, it took a great deal of my time. And when we moved here, one of the reasons we moved here 14 years ago is that his experience in school was not particularly good. And I wanted to homeschool him. And there was no easy way to do that in Pennsylvania. And the laws are a little different here. That allowed me to do that, and I'm a freelance writer, so I can arrange my schedule around his, and I worked a bit less, and we did that. But we pick and choose. We're not also trying to figure out how he can play soccer and how he can be, a million other things. They're very specific choices, and at this point, he is very independent. As you see, he has his own space. He goes to capabilities. He goes out with his life friends. He will be working again, and that won't require my involvement except to maybe drop him off. And, so I just take him down to the church for organ practice a couple times a week, and hopefully he'll learn to do that himself with the Uber. And then he goes to organ. And who knows, I think he will be playing organ in church a little bit, and we may join the choir. I'm not sure if that'll work out. We're going to see about that. But, again, like with choir, because he's a kid with special needs, they don't teach you how to sing in harmony. They just say, well, anything you do is lovely, dear. And so, therefore, he doesn't learn the skills. So the skills have to be directly taught. And they need to be directly taught to an adult man. They're not intuitive. Singing in harmony is not intuitive for most people. So... And when you have special needs, they're more than happy to give you a coloring page and tell you it's wonderful that you colored in the lines, or even if you didn't color in the lines. They don't teach you how to mix colors. They don't teach you how to use tools of art. They don't teach you how to play the recorder. They don't teach you anything. Every other kid has learned to play the recorder. Every other kid has been included in choir where you sing in harmony. Every other kid has learned all these skills, and they don't teach them to kids with special needs, and they will clap for you if you stand up and smile. So you get to the point where you assume that anything you do is fantastic, and it's not true. You need to learn. So that's been our task, is to help him see the difference between okay and good and great. Trying to explain to him why, this book is a good book and this book is a crappy book. He's now able to really analyze literature, and I say literature, children's literature, but to see the similarities between Redwall and Harry Potter and how they are almost the same story, and he's the one that pointed that out. And I went, damn, you're right. Same story. I didn't realize that. Down to the snakes, everything. Same story. Quite weird. So that kind of thing. He and his dad, I and his dad and his sister, we spend a lot of time trying to help him to see what good and great and not so good look like. Tom is not aware, as many people with autism are, when he is not included. The only time he really feels it is when somebody's actively nasty. If somebody's actively hurtful, he certainly responds. But if somebody gives him a sidelong glance or, rolls their eyes, he doesn't see it. He doesn't feel it. He's not aware that he's not always at the same level as his peers. He doesn't see it. Other people do, and they get very frustrated if they can't perform to the level that they expect themselves to be able to perform at, or if people are not kind or not accepting. Tom, less so. But it will just depend on the person.
Okay. Anything else?
I think you covered it.
We got about 4 hours.
You've got an awful lot.
Really, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
And it looks kind of puny, but I decided to let it be much taller.
Yeah. How long did it take you to make that?
A couple of days.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been making shapes out of triangles, putting antennas on top, putting flags.